Admiral Jake Morrison looked at the message on his desk and shook his head in amazement. 1 year after humanity's departure from Council space, the impossible had happened. The Galactic Council, the most powerful organization in known space, was formally requesting negotiations for humanity's return. The message had arrived through official diplomatic channels, sealed with the authorization codes of all remaining council members. The tone was completely different from the ultimatum he had received in the crystal chambers just 12 months ago. Captain Ben Torres knocked on the door of Jake's office aboard the flagship New Geneva. "Admiral, the diplomatic team is ready for departure. Are you certain about this approach?" Jake stood up and walked to the window overlooking the bustling spaceport of humanity's new capital world. Ships from dozens of independent species came and went freely, no longer requiring permission from any council to explore the infinite possibilities of space. "We're going to listen to what they have to say," Jake replied. "But we're not negotiating from weakness this time." The flight to Nexus Prime took 3 days. When Jake and his team arrived at the council chambers, the scene was dramatically different from his last visit. The massive crystal hall was half empty. Several species had withdrawn their membership entirely, and those who remained looked exhausted and desperate. Council Speaker Vorth 9 floated down from its platform, but the confident authority it had displayed a year ago was gone. When it spoke, the words seemed smaller, more uncertain. "Admiral Morrison, we appreciate your willingness to meet with us. The past year has been difficult for all council members." Jake nodded politely but said nothing. The silence stretched until the floating gas being continued. "We have come to realize that humanity's contributions to galactic civilization were more significant than we initially understood. Your departure has created challenges that we are struggling to address." The spider creature from the arachnid collective clicked nervously. "Our agricultural systems have collapsed without human expertise. Billions of our people face starvation if we cannot restore food production to previous levels." From the crystalline platform came pulsing lights that indicated extreme distress. "Our research programs have stagnated. Medical breakthroughs have stopped. Engineering projects fail without human problem-solving approaches." Jake listened to their litany of problems with growing understanding. The council members were discovering what Dr. Linda Foster had predicted. They had become so dependent on human capabilities that they could no longer function effectively without them. "What exactly are you proposing?" Jake asked when they finished. Vorth 9 moved closer. "We offer full council membership with equal voting rights. Complete territorial recognition for all human colonies, including those in previously restricted sectors. Acceptance of human governmental systems without modification. In exchange, we ask that humanity return to help stabilize galactic civilization." Captain Torres, serving as Jake's aide, leaned forward slightly. "And what assurance do we have that these terms would be honored long-term, the crystalline being pulsed with different colors?" "You have our formal commitment. All restrictions on human expansion and development would be permanently lifted." Jake stood up and walked to the center of the chamber, just as he had done a year ago. But this time, he was not looking up at his judges. He was addressing equals who needed his help. "I appreciate your offer, but humanity will not be rejoining the Galactic Council." The silence that followed was complete. Several alien beings shifted uncomfortably on their platforms. This was clearly not the response they had expected. However, Jake continued, "We have an alternative proposal." He activated a holographic projector that filled the chamber with a 3-dimensional map of known space. The display showed not just council territory, but the vast regions beyond it, where independent civilizations thrived. "This is the Open Cooperation Protocol," Jake announced. "A new model for interstellar relations based on voluntary participation, mutual respect, and shared benefits without centralized control." The map showed trade routes, research partnerships, and diplomatic connections between dozens of species that had never been part of any galactic government. Each civilization maintained complete independence while cooperating with others on projects of mutual interest. Dr. Emma Hayes, now serving as humanity's Director of Interstellar Relations, stepped forward to explain the details. Under this system, species work together because they choose to, not because they're required to. Scientific research advances faster because it's driven by curiosity rather than bureaucratic approval. Economic growth accelerates because trade relationships are based on mutual benefit rather than imposed regulations. The spider creature clicked uncertainly. But how would disputes be resolved without central authority? Through voluntary mediation, Emma replied. Species that want help resolving conflicts can request assistance from neutral parties. Species that prefer to handle their own problems are free to do so. Fourth 9 floated back slightly. This system sounds chaotic. How would you maintain order across galactic civilization? Jake smiled. We wouldn't. Order would maintain itself through mutual self-interest and voluntary cooperation. Captain Torres activated another display showing the results of humanity's first year under the new system. Trade between independent species has increased by 300%. Scientific breakthroughs have doubled. Territorial conflicts have decreased to virtually zero. The evidence was overwhelming. The network of independent civilizations was not only functioning, it was thriving in ways that council-controlled space never had. The crystalline being pulsed with what appeared to be confusion. Are you saying that some council members could participate in this new system, while others remained in the traditional government structure? Absolutely, Emma confirmed. The Open Cooperation Protocol doesn't require anyone to abandon existing relationships. It simply provides an alternative way of interacting with the broader galactic community. Over the following days, representatives from the Independent Species Network arrived at Nexus Prime to participate in the discussions. Jake watched with fascination as aliens who had never met before began forming partnerships based on shared interest rather than political necessity. Captain Zara 9 of the Independent Crystalline Federation worked with aquatic Dominion scientists on water purification technology. Engineer species from beyond Council space shared advanced manufacturing techniques with struggling Council members. Medical researchers collaborated across species lines without waiting for bureaucratic approval. Within a week, 3 Council member species had formally applied to join the Open Cooperation Protocol while maintaining their existing government relationships. Within a month, that number had grown to 7. The transformation was remarkable. Species that had been stagnating under Council control began innovating again when they gained access to independent research networks. Trade relationships that had been strangled by bureaucratic regulations flourished under voluntary cooperation agreements. President Maria Santos arrived for the final sessions, accompanied by representatives from 23 independent species. The sight of so many non-council civilizations working together was both inspiring and intimidating for the traditional galactic government. The Galactic Council is welcome to continue governing those species that prefer centralized authority, Maria announced in her address to the assembled beings. But the age of forced compliance is over. The galaxy is large enough for many different approaches to civilization. Admiral Morrison watched from the observation deck as the first interstellar Cooperation Summit concluded. Below, representatives from over 50 species worked together on projects ranging from deep space exploration to medical research. The old council chambers had become the meeting place for something entirely new. Commander Steve Morgan, now leading humanity's deep space exploration fleet, approached Jake with a report. Admiral, our long-range sensors are detecting signals from distant galaxies. It appears that interstellar civilization extends far beyond this region of space. Jake looked up at the stars visible through the chamber's transparent dome. What kind of signals? Trade communications, scientific data exchanges, cultural broadcasts. There are networks of independent civilizations spanning multiple galaxies, and they're all based on voluntary cooperation rather than centralized control. The implications were staggering. Humanity's quiet exit from the Galactic Council hadn't just shattered one galactic government. It had connected them to a vast universe of independent civilizations that had discovered better ways to organize. Interstellar society. Dr. Alan Cooper joined them on the observation deck, having returned from his archaeological expeditions. I've been studying the ruins of galactic governments throughout this region of space. The pattern is consistent across millions of years of history. Centralized control always leads to stagnation and eventual collapse. Voluntary cooperation leads to growth and expansion. Jake nodded, understanding finally dawning. We didn't just leave the council. We helped the galaxy rediscover how civilization is supposed to work. Captain Alex Turner stood on the observation deck of the exploration vessel New Horizon and watched the stars that had never been mapped by the Galactic Council. 6 months had passed since humanity's complete withdrawal from Council space, and the reports coming through the communication networks were both fascinating and disturbing. Captain, his communications officer, Lieutenant Sarah Brooks, called from her station. We're receiving another batch of intercepted Council transmissions. The situation seems to be getting worse. Alex walked over to review the decoded messages. The Council's internal communications painted a picture of growing chaos across their territory. What had started as minor inconveniences was becoming a full-scale crisis. On the arachnid homeworld, the agricultural systems were failing. The spider-like creatures had boasted about their superior biotechnology, claiming that their organic farming methods were far more advanced than human techniques. But the truth was becoming clear in their desperate internal messages. Colony 7 reports crop yields down 40%. Alex read aloud. Colony 12 experiencing complete root rot in primary food plants. Request immediate consultation with previous human agricultural advisors. Lieutenant Brooks nodded grimly. It's the same story from all their agricultural worlds. Turns out Professor Kate Lewis wasn't just providing friendly advice when she worked with them. She was actually managing their entire food production system. The Arachnid Collective had never understood the underlying principles behind Kate's innovations. They had simply followed her recommendations without learning the science behind them. Now, without her guidance, their advanced biotechnology was proving useless against basic agricultural problems. The situation was similar across Zephyrian space. Alex switched to another set of intercepted messages, these ones from the energy sector. Engineer Danny Phillips had spent 3 years working with Zephyrian power systems, officially as part of a cultural exchange program. The Zephyrians had thought they were teaching him about their superior energy technology. Power grid failures cascading across sectors 7 through 12. Alex read from the latest Zephyrian transmission. Engineering teams unable to diagnose cause. Systems worked perfectly until recent modifications were attempted. The truth was that Danny had been quietly fixing fundamental problems in Zephyrian energy distribution systems. His minor adjustments had actually been major overhauls that kept their entire civilization powered. Without his ongoing maintenance and problem-solving, their technology was breaking down faster than they could repair it. Dr. Rachel Green's voice came through the communication system from New Geneva, humanity's new capital world. Captain Turner, are you receiving the medical reports from Council space? Alex activated the holographic display to include Rachel in the conversation. Yes, Doctor. It's not good news for them. Rachel's expression was troubled. Medical research across all Council species has essentially stopped. They relied on human creativity and problem-solving abilities more than any of us realized. Dr. Jennifer Scott was apparently the driving force behind most of their recent breakthroughs in genetic therapy. The pattern was consistent across every field of science and technology. Humans had been quietly solving problems, providing innovations, and managing systems throughout Council space while being treated as junior partners. Their departure had left gaps that the alien species couldn't fill on their own. What about their diplomatic situation? Alex asked. Lieutenant Brooks brought up another set of intercepted communications. That might be the worst part. 3 separate territorial disputes have erupted in the past month. The Vorthan supremacy and the Aquatic Dominion are in active conflict over mining rights in the Rigel sector. Alex frowned. I thought they had treaties covering resource allocation. They do, but the treaties were negotiated with human mediators. Ambassador Patricia Moore apparently spent 2 years working out the details of those agreements. Without her to manage ongoing disputes and clarify treaty language, both sides are interpreting the agreements differently. The Council had assumed that diplomacy was simply a matter of following established procedures. They hadn't realized that successful interspecies relations required constant human insight into the motivations and concerns of different alien cultures. Human diplomats had been the invisible glue holding the galactic government together. Captain, Danny Phillips's voice joined the communication from his exploration ship near the edge of known space. Alex, we're seeing signs that some Council species are trying to make direct contact with us. What kind of contact? Unofficial channels. Individual scientists, engineers, and diplomats reaching out through intermediaries. They're offering significant payments for consultation services. Rachel looked interested. Are we responding to these requests? Alex considered the question carefully. President Santos issued guidance about this situation. We're not cutting off all contact with Council species, but we're not providing the kind of systematic support we used to give them either. The philosophy behind humanity's approach was simple, but effective. Individual humans could work with Council species on specific projects if they chose to do so, but humanity as a civilization would not provide the kind of comprehensive problem-solving that had made the alien species dependent on human capabilities. Captain, Lieutenant Brooks, interrupted. We're receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Morrison. It's marked as urgent. Admiral Jake Morrison's image appeared on the main display. Behind him, the command center of the human fleet buzzed with unusual activity. Captains, we have a significant development. The Council has requested formal, diplomatic contact. Alex raised an eyebrow. They want to negotiate our return? That's what we thought initially, but the message is more interesting than that. Jake activated a holographic display showing the official Council communication. They're not demanding our return. They're asking for help. The message was brief, but revealing. Council Speaker Vorth 9 acknowledged that humanity's departure had created unexpected challenges in maintaining galactic stability. They were requesting emergency consultation services to help resolve the growing crises across Council space. Captain Phillips laughed on the communication channel. So they want us to come back and fix their problems without actually rejoining their government. That's exactly what they want, Jake confirmed. But it gets more interesting. Intelligence reports suggest that several Council member species are considering withdrawal from the galactic government. Dr. Green looked surprised. Which species? The Aquatic Dominion is apparently in serious discussions about leaving. The Vorthan supremacy is questioning whether Council membership is worth the restrictions it places on their expansion. Even some of the smaller species are making inquiries about the process of independence. Alex felt a surge of satisfaction. Humanity's successful departure was proving that alternatives to Council control were possible. Other species were beginning to realize that they didn't have to accept subordination in exchange for security. What's our response to the Council's request for help? Alex asked. Jake smiled. President Santos is preparing a counterproposal. We're not rejoining the Council, and we're not providing systematic support for their failing systems, but we are willing to participate in a new kind of relationship. The concept was revolutionary by galactic standards. Instead of a hierarchical government that controlled member species, humanity was proposing a network of independent civilizations that cooperated voluntarily on projects of mutual benefit. We're calling it the Open Cooperation Protocol, Jake explained. No central authority, no imposed regulations, no mandatory participation, just voluntary collaboration between equals. Lieutenant Brooks looked up from her station. Sir, I'm detecting several non-Council ships approaching our position. They're broadcasting friendly identification signals. The ships that appeared on the tactical display were from species that Alex had never encountered before. As humanity had expanded beyond Council space, they had discovered a vast network of independent civilizations that had either never joined the galactic government or had left it centuries ago. Captain Turner, came a new voice over the communication system. This is Captain Zara 9 of the Independent Crystalline Federation. We're not part of the Council's crystalline hegemony. We represent the crystal-based life forms that chose independence over absorption. Alex was amazed. How many independent species are there beyond Council space? Dozens, Zara 9 replied. Perhaps hundreds. The Council represents only a fraction of galactic civilization. Most advanced species learned long ago that central authority leads to stagnation and eventual collapse. The revelation changed everything. Humanity hadn't just left the Council. They had joined a much larger community of independent civilizations that had been thriving outside the galactic government's control for thousands of years. Dr. Green's voice carried excitement. Alex, we're receiving similar contact from independent species near New Geneva. It appears that humanity's departure from the Council has opened up communication channels that we never knew existed. As Alex looked out at the stars, he realized that humanity's quiet exit hadn't just shattered the Galactic Council's assumptions about control and dependence. Commander Troy Baker watched from the bridge of the UES Enterprise as another massive transport ship loaded the last residents of New Berlin Colony. The operation was going smoother than anyone had dared to hope. What should have been chaos was, instead, the most organized evacuation in galactic history. Sir, the Patterson family transport reports they're ready for departure, his communications officer, Lieutenant Amy Chen, announced from her station. Troy nodded and marked another item on his checklist. Tell them they're cleared for jump. Destination coordinates are already loaded in their navigation system. Through the main view screen, he could see the colony below. Just 3 weeks ago, New Berlin had been a thriving city of 800,000 people. Now it was nearly empty, its buildings standing like silent monuments to human presence. But the emptiness wasn't sad or desperate. It was purposeful, organized, complete. Dr. Linda Foster stood near the navigation station, reviewing reports on her portable device. As the expedition's xenobiologist, she had been studying Council records that humanity now had access to as they prepared to leave. What she had discovered was disturbing. Commander, she said, looking up from her screen, I need to share something important with you. Troy glanced at her while keeping one eye on the evacuation progress. What is it, Doctor? Linda activated a holographic display that showed the genetic and cultural profiles of various species that had joined the Council over the past 1,000 years. I've been analyzing the patterns of Council membership. Look at this. The display showed timeline after timeline of species joining the galactic government. Each one followed a similar pattern: initial membership, gradual integration, increasing dependence, and finally, complete loss of independence. The aquatic dominion used to be 12 separate nations, Linda explained. They joined the Council for trade benefits and mutual defense. Within 200 years, they had lost the ability to govern themselves independently. Their technology, economy, and even their culture became completely dependent on Council systems. Troy frowned as he studied the data. Are you saying the Council deliberately makes species dependent on them? Not deliberately, but systematically. They offer help and guidance that gradually replaces local capabilities. Eventually, member species can't survive without Council support. Linda switched to another display. The crystalline hegemony used to be a federation of crystal-based life forms with dozens of different approaches to science and technology. Now they all think the same way, use the same methods, and can't innovate without Council approval. The implications were staggering. Troy looked around the bridge at his crew, all of whom were listening intently. How many species have they absorbed this way? All of them, Linda replied quietly. Every current Council member started as an independent civilization. None of them could survive on their own anymore. Lieutenant Chen looked up from her station. Sir, we're receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Morrison. He's requesting immediate communication with all senior commanders. Troy nodded. Put him through. Admiral Jake Morrison's image appeared on the main screen. He looked tired but determined. Behind him, the command center of humanity's flagship buzzed with activity. Commanders, I'm updating you on the Council's reaction to our departure. Jake began without preamble. They still seem to believe this is a negotiating tactic. Their intelligence reports suggest they expect us to return within days, begging for readmission. Captain Alex Turner's voice came through the communication system from his position, commanding the evacuation of the Tau Ceti colonies. What's their evidence for thinking that? They've never seen a species successfully leave council space, Jake replied. According to their records, every attempt at independence has failed within months. The departing species always comes back, usually in worse condition than when they left. Troy leaned forward in his command chair. That's because those other species had become dependent on council systems. We never did. Exactly. Dr. Foster's research confirms what our colonial planners suspected 50 years ago. The council doesn't just govern. It gradually absorbs the civilizations that join it. We're the first species in their recorded history that maintained true independence while participating in their system. On the planet below, the last transport ships were lifting off from New Berlin's spaceport. The evacuation was complete ahead of schedule, and the colony's infrastructure had been carefully shut down rather than abandoned. Nothing was left that could be useful to other species, but nothing was destroyed either. Commander Lisa Rodriguez's voice joined the conversation from her position overseeing the evacuation of the Outer Rim colonies. Admiral, we're seeing something interesting out here. Several non-council species have made contact with our evacuation fleets. What kind of contact? Jake asked. Friendly contact. They're offering assistance, information about suitable worlds beyond council space, and what appears to be informal alliance opportunities. Lisa's voice carried a note of excitement. It seems like there's an entire network of independent civilizations out there that we never knew about. Troy felt a surge of hope. Are you saying we're not going to be alone out there? Far from it. Captain Danny Phillips is reporting similar contacts near the Vega colonies. Captain Steve Morgan says the same thing is happening in the Centauri sector. It's like there's a whole other galaxy beyond council space populated by species that chose independence over security. Dr. Foster looked up from her research again. That makes sense. If the council has been absorbing civilizations for thousands of years, there would naturally be others who refused to join or who left before becoming dependent. Jake nodded on the screen. That's our theory as well. Intelligence suggests that council space represents maybe 30% of inhabited systems in this region of the galaxy. The rest is independent territory that the council either can't or won't try to control. The conversation was interrupted by an alert from the tactical station. Ensign Mike Ross looked up with concern. Sir, we're detecting council surveillance. Ships at the edge of the system. 3 Zephyrian cruisers and what looks like an arachnid intelligence vessel. Troy wasn't surprised. They're monitoring our evacuation to see if we're really leaving or just making a show of it. Let them watch, Jake said from the main screen. Transparency works in our favor. The more clearly they see that we're actually departing, the more confused they'll become. Captain Turner's voice crackled through the communication system again. Admiral, the Tau Ceti evacuation is complete. Final transport ship just jumped out of the system. We left them a complete database of our agricultural and terraforming techniques as a farewell gift. Good thinking, Jake replied. The same approach we're using everywhere. We're not leaving in anger, we're leaving in friendship. But we are leaving completely. Dr. Foster pulled up another display showing the timeline of human colonial development. Commander Baker, look at this. Our colonial expansion over the past 50 years wasn't random. The pattern shows we were unconsciously preparing for exactly this scenario. Troy studied the map she showed him. Human colonies formed a rough trail leading away from council space toward the galactic rim. Each settlement was positioned to support, the next creating a natural evacuation route that led to regions the council had never explored. It's almost like we knew this day would come, he murmured. Maybe we did, Linda replied. Human instincts have always favored independence over security. Even when we joined the council, part of us was preparing to leave. The last transport ship from New Berlin colony jumped to hyperspace, its destination a world called New Geneva, that would become humanity's new capital. Troy watched it disappear into the star field and felt a strange mixture of sadness and excitement. Sir, Lieutenant Chen reported, I'm receiving departure confirmations from all evacuation sites. The operation is 97% complete. Estimated time to full withdrawal, 48 hours. Jake Morrison smiled on the main screen. Outstanding work, everyone. In 2 days, humanity will be completely independent for the first time. In 50 years, and based on the intelligence we're gathering, we're going to have plenty of company in our new neighborhood. Troy looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They looked confident, determined, and ready for whatever came next. Behind them, through the viewports, the last lights of New Berlin Colony went dark as automated systems shut down the infrastructure. Humanity was leaving Council space, but they were leaving it better than they had found it. The Council surveillance ships continued to watch from the edge of the system, trying to understand what they were witnessing. For the first time in their recorded history, a member species was actually leaving, taking their knowledge and abilities with them, and apparently thriving in the process. It was something their political models said was impossible, but the evidence was right in front of them, and it was just the beginning. Dr. Alan Cooper brushed the ancient dust away from the carved symbols and felt his heart racing. Deep beneath the surface of Kepler 442c, in ruins that predated the current galactic civilization by millions of years, he had found something extraordinary. The translation matrix finally clicked into place and the meaning of the alien text became clear. Council-like Organization Number 4, he read aloud to his assistant, a young archaeologist named Pete Harrison, failed after attempting to control the Vorthak expansion. Note: species that refuse central authority typically develop faster than those that accept it. Recommend avoiding contact with expanding civilizations. Pete looked up from his own dig site nearby. How many of these failed galactic governments have you found records of? Alan checked his notes. This makes 7. Every single one collapsed when they tried to force compliance from species that valued independence. He stood up and wiped the sweat from his forehead. The pattern is always the same. The Council grows powerful, demands submission, and eventually pushes too hard against someone who refuses to bend. Meanwhile, on Earth, President Maria Santos sat in the Oval Office reading Jake Morrison's report for the 3rd time. The words remained just as shocking as they had been during the first reading. Around her, the most powerful people in human government waited for her response. Secretary of Defense Henry Clark leaned forward in his chair. The military implications are clear, Madam President. If we don't comply, we're looking at economic warfare followed by direct military action. How long do we have before the sanctions take effect? Maria asked. According to Admiral Morrison, 30 days to comply or face immediate trade cutoffs, Henry replied. But I don't think that's our biggest problem. General Ben Clark, no relation to the secretary despite the similar name, spread a series of holographic displays across the conference table. I've been in contact with our colonial governors. The response has been surprising. Maria raised an eyebrow. Surprising how? They're not panicked. In fact, most of them seem relieved that this confrontation is finally happening. Ben touched a control, and the displays showed detailed reports from human colonies across known space. Governor Lisa Park on New Montana says her people have been preparing for this possibility for years. Governor Danny Wright on Haven Colony reports similar readiness levels. Secretary of State Nancy Foster looked confused. Preparing for what? Exactly. Ben smiled grimly. For independence, complete independence. It turns out our colonial planners have been much more far-sighted than anyone realized. Dr. Emma Hayes, director of the Colonial Planning Authority, stood up and activated her own set of displays. When we first joined the Galactic Council 50 years ago, we made a conscious decision. We would participate but never become dependent on Council systems. The holographic images showed supply chains, trade routes, and resource flows connecting human colonies. Maria studied them carefully, beginning to understand what she was seeing. Every human colony is self-sufficient, Emma continued. We never relied on Council technology for critical systems. We never integrated our economies so deeply that separation would cause collapse. We always maintained our own supply lines and communication networks. Henry shook his head. But the sanctions will still hurt us. We've built up significant trade relationships with Council species. True, Emma agreed. But those relationships benefit them more than they benefit us. We've been providing solutions to problems they couldn't solve on their own. We've been filling gaps in their technology and knowledge base that they didn't even realize existed. Maria leaned back in her chair. What exactly are you suggesting? General, Clark answered for her. We're suggesting that we don't fight the Council's demands, we don't negotiate with them. We simply leave. The room fell silent. Outside the windows, Washington, D.C. continued its normal daily rhythm, unaware that the most important decision in human history was being discussed just a few blocks away. Leave? Maria asked quietly. Complete withdrawal from Council space, Emma confirmed. We take our colonies, our technology, our people, and we establish ourselves in territories beyond Council control. Secretary Foster looked horrified. That would mean abandoning billions of people who live in Council space. No, Ben said. It would mean relocating them. We've identified 47 star systems beyond current Council territory that could support human colonies. Our deep space exploration teams have been quietly surveying them for decades. Maria stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city that had been humanity's political center for centuries. How many people would we be moving? Approximately 2.3 billion, Emma replied. It sounds like a lot, but our transport capacity is much larger than most people realize. We've been building it up steadily, officially for normal colonial expansion, but designed to handle emergency evacuation if necessary. You've been planning this for decades? Maria asked, turning back to face the room. Emma nodded. Not this specific scenario, but the possibility that we might need to leave Council space quickly. We learned from history. Every species that becomes too dependent on galactic government eventually loses its independence entirely. Henry still looked skeptical. Even if we could move everyone, what about the economic disruption, the loss of trade, the isolation? Dr. Alan Cooper's voice came through the communication system, connecting from his dig site on Kepler 442c. If I may interrupt, I have some relevant information from my archaeological research. Maria pressed a button to put him on the main speakers. Go ahead, Dr. Cooper. I've been studying the ruins of previous galactic civilizations. The pattern is clear. Every time a central authority tries to force compliance on an independent species, the authority eventually collapses. The independent species doesn't just survive. It often becomes the foundation for the next phase of galactic development. You're saying the Council itself might not survive this confrontation? Maria asked. I'm saying that based on historical evidence. Centralized galactic governments are inherently unstable. They grow too rigid, make too many demands, and eventually something breaks. The question is whether we want to be part of that collapse or positioned to help build whatever comes next. General Clark brought up another set of displays. Our intelligence indicates that several other species have already withdrawn from active Council participation. They maintain minimal diplomatic contact but govern themselves independently. We wouldn't be alone out there, Emma added. And our survey teams have detected signs of advanced civilizations beyond Council space. Entire regions of the galaxy that the Council has never even explored, populated by species that never joined any galactic government. Maria returned to her seat and looked around the table at her advisors. These were smart, experienced people who had spent their careers thinking about humanity's place in the galaxy. If they all agreed that withdrawal was possible, maybe it was. What would be our first steps? She asked. Ben answered immediately. We activate Operation Exodus. It's a contingency plan we've had in place for 20 years. Phase 1 involves notifying all colonial governors to begin evacuation preparations. Phase 2 starts the actual movement of people and resources. Phase 3 is the complete withdrawal from Council space. How long would the entire process take? 6 months for complete evacuation. Another 6 months to establish our new territories and resume normal operations. Maria closed her eyes and thought about the magnitude of the decision she was being asked to make. Move over 2 billion people. Abandon 50 years of careful diplomatic relationships. Risk everything on the hope that humanity could thrive independently. When she opened her eyes, her expression was determined. Dr. Cooper, what did those ancient records say happened to the species that refused to submit to galactic authority? Alan's voice came through clearly. They flourished, Madam President. Every single one of them developed faster and achieved more after they left than they had while they were members of the galactic government. Maria looked around the table one more time. Then we leave. Authorize Operation Exodus. Send word to Admiral Morrison to inform the Council that humanity declines their generous offer to remain as junior members. We're going to show them what independence really looks like. The room erupted in activity as her advisors began implementing the most ambitious plan in human history. Outside, the sun was setting over Washington, but for humanity, a new dawn was about to begin. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the center of the vast crystal chamber and felt very small. The walls stretched up so high he could barely see the ceiling. Strange lights danced through the transparent surfaces, making everything glow with an eerie, blue color. Around him sat the most powerful beings in the known galaxy, each one looking down at him from their elevated platforms. Captain Lisa Rodriguez walked beside him, her boots clicking on the smooth floor. She carried a small device that recorded everything they said and heard. Her face stayed calm, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. They both knew this meeting would change everything for humanity. The chamber fell silent as a massive shape floated down from the highest platform. Vorth 9 looked like a living cloud of green gas held together by some invisible force. When it spoke, the words seemed to come from everywhere at once, filling the entire space with its deep, rumbling voice. "Human representatives," Vorth 9 began. "You have been summoned to receive the final judgment of the Galactic Council." The words echoed off the crystal walls, making them sound even more ominous. Jake nodded respectfully. "We are here to listen." A sharp clicking sound came from the left side of the chamber. The Arachnid Collective's representative, a creature that looked like a giant spider made of black metal, raised one of its many legs. "The charges against your species are serious," it said in a voice that sounded like grinding gears. "You have violated 17 major protocols and 43 minor regulations in the past standard year alone." On the right side, a being that looked like living crystal began to pulse with different colors. This was Speaker Zeph Alpha of the crystalline hegemony. "Your people refuse to adopt the standard galactic currency system. You insist on maintaining your primitive democratic governments instead of the proven technocratic model. Worst of all, you continue expanding into restricted sectors without authorization." Lisa stepped forward slightly. "If I may ask, which sectors are you referring to?" A holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber, showing a three-dimensional map of local space. Red dots marked human colonies scattered across dozens of star systems. Yellow zones indicated areas the Council had designated as off-limits to developing species. "These 17 colonies," Vorth 9 announced, "exist in zones reserved for advanced civilizations. Your people have built cities, farms, and industrial facilities on worlds that should remain untouched until you prove yourselves worthy of such expansion." Jake studied the map carefully. Every red dot represented millions of human lives, families who had worked for years to build new homes among the stars. The Council's restrictions were not clearly communicated when we first joined. Many of these colonies were established before we knew of the limitations. The spider creature clicked again, this time sounding almost amused. "Ignorance of galactic law is not an excuse. The Zephyrian Empire learned this lesson 1,000 years ago when they tried to expand beyond their designated space." A new voice joined the conversation. It came from a platform near the back where a being that looked like flowing water held the shape of a roughly humanoid form. This was the representative of the aquatic dominion. "The humans show the same arrogance that has destroyed lesser species. They believe their small achievements give them the right to ignore the wisdom of their betters." Jake felt his jaw tighten but kept his voice level. "We have always respected the Council's authority. Our colonies have followed environmental protection protocols and have not interfered with other species' territorial claims." "That is not the point," Vorth 9 replied. "The point is that you act without permission. You make decisions as if you were an equal member of this council instead of a junior species under our guidance." The crystalline being pulsed brighter. "Your trade practices are equally problematic. You refuse to standardize your economic systems with ours. You insist on bilateral agreements instead of accepting council oversight. This creates chaos in our carefully maintained markets." Lisa looked up at the speakers. "Our economic independence has never harmed council trade. In fact, our alternative approaches have often benefited member species who chose to work with us. A sound like breaking glass came from the crystal being. Benefits that come without proper authorization are meaningless. Order must be maintained. The floating gas cloud moved closer to Jake and Lisa. We have been patient with humanity. When you first joined the Council 50 years ago, we expected you would learn to follow our guidance as all successful species do. Instead, you have become more independent, more defiant. We have never been defiant, Jake said quietly. We have simply maintained our right to govern ourselves as we see fit. That attitude ends now, Fourth Nine declared. The chamber filled, with a sound like distant thunder. The Council has reached its decision. Humanity has 30 galactic standard days to comply with the following requirements. Another holographic display appeared, showing a list of demands written in multiple languages, including human English. Jake read through them quickly, his expression growing more serious with each line. First, all unauthorized colonies must be abandoned within 20 days. Second, human governments must adopt Council-approved administrative structures within the full 30-day period. Third, all human economic activity must be integrated into the Council's standard systems. Fourth, future human expansion must be pre-approved by the Council's Colonization Committee. Lisa looked at Jake, then back at the assembled aliens. And if we refuse? The spider creature's multiple eyes focused on her. Economic sanctions will be imposed immediately. All trade with Council species will cease. Your colonies will be isolated from galactic commerce. The crystalline being added. If sanctions prove insufficient, military intervention will follow. Your species will be relocated to designated worlds where you can be properly supervised until you learn to follow galactic law. Jake stood silently for several long moments, looking around the chamber at the beings who had just threatened his entire species. The weight of their decision pressed down on him like a physical force. Behind him, he could hear Lisa's quiet breathing and the soft hum of her recording device. Finally, he spoke. We understand your position. We will provide our answer within the time frame you have given us. The silence that followed was complete. Fourth Nine floated back slightly, as if surprised by the calm response. The other Council members shifted, on their platforms clearly expecting desperate negotiations or angry defiance. That is all? The spider creature asked. No arguments? No pleas for mercy? No demands to speak with your leaders? Jake shook his head. We came here to listen, and we have listened. Now we must return to our people and discuss what we have heard. You will have our answer in 30 days. He turned to leave, Lisa falling into step beside him. As they walked toward the chamber's exit, whispered conversations began among the Council members in dozens of different alien languages. At the doorway, Jake paused and looked back at the assembled beings. Thank you for your time and your clarity. It has been very educational. The massive doors closed behind them with a sound like distant thunder, leaving the Council members to wonder what they had just witnessed. In their long history of dealing with developing species, none had ever responded to an ultimatum with such quiet acceptance. It made them more nervous than any amount of shouting would have.